All right. Well, good afternoon. This is Rich Donley. I'm president of Crimson. I'm also a member of the PRSA Detroit and PRSA Orlando chapter, and I'm the moderator of today's live panel discussion. And I point out live, yes, it'll be rebroadcast, but we're all here, we're all interactive, and want to make sure this is an interactive discussion. But I certainly want to welcome you to the Accreditation Matters, What to Know About the APR. We are proud to have a partnership here. PRSA Detroit, this is the first program for 2024, and it's a joint presentation with PRSA Orlando's chapter. We have a nice representative group from each chapter, and we also have a number of guests, including students that have joined us. So on behalf of both chapters, thank you for your participation today. We have some expert panelists, as you can see, who have earned their APR, some in 2023, others just prior to that, and others that were much longer than that. And each will be introducing themselves in a few moments. It's always important to note before we begin today's discussion, we want you to take note of the antitrust statement on the screen. It's featured here and it's adhered to at PRSA events and meetings. Also note, this webinar is being recorded and it'll be available for viewing afterward. We'll be sending that out. Certainly, we appreciate all of you and also appreciate all of our sponsors that are able to help make programming like this possible. Certainly want to thank the Detroit sponsors that are 2023 sponsors, as you can see there. And also to the 2024 PRSA Orlando chapter sponsors as well. Now, it's my pleasure to be able to share a brief introductory video from PRSA Detroit's Accreditation Committee co-chair, Kristen Sokol, with a special message for all attendees.
Thank you for joining today's webinar on why accreditation in the profession of APR matters. I'm Kristen Sokol, co-chair of PRSA Detroit's Accreditation Committee. First, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and to today's moderators and panelists, as well as the PRSA Orlando chapter for sharing their expertise in the process of earning your APR. Making the decision to earn accreditation is a benefit not only to you in reinforcing your knowledge and skills, but it is also a benefit to the profession at large to demonstrate the dedication our practitioners have to the field. And that's both in engaging the practices of public relations to their best advantage and adhering to the ethics necessary to lead and to counsel. While earning the APR is an independent practice, it does not have to be a solitary endeavor. I encourage you to reach out to your local chapter to gain access to the support systems we have in place to help you be successful. From mentors to panel review coordination and advice to maintaining your credentials after you've earned them. And with that, I hope you find today's webinar to be that next step toward embarking on your own journey toward accreditation. And on to our panelists.
So thank you for that, Kristen. And so as I mentioned, just our quick roadmap that we're going to have here as we go on our journey of going through this webinar. We're going to have each of us do an introduction, brief introduction, not just your typical, all of our experience, but more focused on why we pursued APR, some of the challenges we had, and we'll be sharing those insights as we move forward. In a moment, you're going to see a poll pop up on the screen as well. We're going to ask the question of you about why you're looking to earn your APR. We're going to go through the overview of the process, but we're also going to, of course, get into those individual steps. But we're going to open it up with each of the panelists for personal experiences, insights, and the Q&A function that is available to you. We do encourage you throughout to be able to use the Q&A, and then we'll be taking some of those questions as we go through that. But this is designed to really focus on those experiences and insights, not to go through all the level of detail of what is needed, but this is a chance to share what we know. And as I mentioned, the Q&A throughout, and at the end, please again use that Q&A function. Chat is available as well. That goes directly to the hosts and panelists. So what's our approach here? What do we want to do? The four of us have discussed this, and basically our approach that we want to take to this is to demystify that APR process. And as I mentioned before, it's through that firsthand experience and insights. You're going to hear from each of us of the different backgrounds, different challenges we've had, insights, things we've done. We've all approached this in different ways and ended up with the same result of being able to earn that APR. So we want to share those insights with you. So as way of background, my background is journalism, broadcasting major, Wayne State University. Didn't know much about PR. What I didn't even like. I always joke that I didn't even know how to spell PR because of my background. Because people would pitch me stories at the newspaper I worked at. They didn't understand the paper I was writing for. They added no value in my eyes. And that was that aha moment of where PR practitioners really bring that value. And through my career, early in my career, I actually started at the Detroit chapter of APR classes. And the APR classes really immersed me into what public relations was. And I was able to get into the history, learn more about RPI and the importance of planning, not just jumping right into implementation. And that really helped me in my career to learn. And so that's one thing, the advice to you, even if you're not planning to pursue the APR at this time of going through the panel presentation, taking the computer-based exam, just going through the online resources and classes that the panelists will be getting into can be very helpful in what you do. And then as far as my investment of time, I took several years to get my APR. It was start, stop, and finally committed to it and did pursue it at that point. So it wasn't just a quick do it. It took a bit of time. So, all right, I'm going to have each of the other panelists go through and introduce themselves.
All right. Well, thank you, Rich. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Martin, and I got my APR about 7 months ago. And as you'll see on the slide, I work in PR at a healthcare system in Michigan. But for many years, I was in marketing and communications roles where I oversaw a lot of different things, which included PR. But I never thought of myself as a PR professional. I always thought of myself as more of a communications and marketing generalist. So about a year and a half ago, I joined Corewell Health, but not in PR. I was in a different role. And then one day, months later, I was asked if I was interested in leading a PR team. And the idea of it excited me because I thought it would be a good challenge, especially, being in such a large organization. But at the same time, I asked myself, well, is this what I do? Is this what I've ever done? And what you'll hear today, and not just from me, is that the four of us didn't start out in PR. I never had PR classes in undergrad, but I was in a PhD program about 20 years ago, and I had classes in communications theory and research. And you'll find that on the exam. So I'm sure that helped me in some ways. But also what I realized is how well the jobs I had over the years had prepared me. It turns out that over the years, I'd done a lot of what was in the APR study guide. So I had a background in PR, but I just didn't realize it. But I didn't have the training or insights that come from earning a PR, or an APR, I should say. So forward a bit here, last March, I enrolled in the APR online study course, and I got my APR in June. And the reason I'm here talking about it today is because I enjoyed the experience. If there's anything to walk away with this afternoon, it's knowing that the four of us have very different career and education backgrounds, but despite our differences, we all did it, and we're here to tell you about it. Starting next with Tammy.
Thanks, Michelle. So I had zero background in PR when I made the jump from a journalist at the Detroit Free Press into healthcare PR. And I always felt as though I was a journalist practicing PR. I had been a journalist in Cleveland, and I freelanced for years. I spent the time at the Free Press. And then it was suggested to me that I pursue the APR. Again, never had a PR class. And like Michelle, I realized that I had been using a lot of intuitively the practices that you are able to label through this APR process as I was practicing over the last decade. But now I feel like I'm more strategic, and that's what the APR process has helped me with. I started it about it was probably about 2 years ago now. Last April, I was awarded my APR. I did take it in an in-person location. Now it's all online. It's pretty intense, but I think it's well worth it to give you the vision and the kind of processes to help you make you a better PR practitioner. With that, I'm going to move on to Kelly.
Hello. So I also, like everyone else, not quite the same, not a textbook path of PR. I actually wanted to be Oprah. So I went on to pursue broadcast journalism, but I got to the end of it not loving that world and wanting to have more of an impact. And truth be told, I actually was going to switch careers and go on to get a doctorate of physical therapy. So while I was doing the prereqs to complete that, I worked for PR agencies, I worked for local government, and kind of really found my love for PR. But I am not on the media side or the social media side. I am on the executive and internal communication side. So typically with those fields, earning your APR is a little more challenging because one of the key things is the panel presentation, and that requires identifying a campaign to really focus your efforts and show that you understand the key elements. So it took me 2.5 years because I really struggled in finding something that I really owned. So one thing that I did that was a little bit different is oftentimes with your panel presentation, you go back and you look at things that you worked on. And I had the opportunity to actually have a campaign and build it based on the panel presentation and the expectations of earning the APR and everything that involves. So it was really cool. And I really enjoyed the process because I'm such a hands-on learner. So as you can see, my experience spans local government and public and private sector. And so I've had the privilege of touching just about everything you can think of, but I really love that storytelling aspect and very passionate about really leveraging that internal voice, the employee voice, your ambassadors of a company, and really, ensuring that it's all kind of tells that nice story, but also helping to build relationships with your external audience as well. So that's my backstory for earning my APR.
All right, thank you, Kelly, Tammy, and Michelle. All right, at this point, we're going to launch a poll. You should see in just a moment that's going to pop up, but you will see on the screen as well right now what that is. What's the number one reason you're considering earning your APR? We have A, B, C, D, E. Just your number one reason that's going to show up here on the poll in a moment. And if you do select E, other, we ask that you go into the chat and add those comments in chat. That's only if you use E. So we're going to launch the poll here in just a moment here. And it should be coming up right about now. Again, the number one reason you're considering earning an APR. And as those are populating, we're getting 70-some% have responded at this point. And of course, we have someone A, B, C, and D because, yes, there are many reasons. This is actually part of the trick here because, right, in the computer-based exam, which we'll talk about, sometimes it's what is the most, what's the number one? And it may appear to be all three, so there's going to be process of elimination that you need to use here as well when you're going through that. We've all taken tests in some way where that's the case. Sometimes it's 2 or 3, but there's many reasons for this. I'm going to just give it a few more seconds here. We have 81% that participated. And going to end the poll now and share the results. So you should see A is the number one. You should be able to see that showing 56% professional development. And then you're going to see B, or actually the next one is C, position myself as a mentor leader, is 22%. And then tied B and D, B is better job opportunities, promotion or new job, and then also personal growth. I can do this. Again, if those anyone did select E, which I don't see, but you can see where we landed. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Tammy and I both selected A as our choices. It was professional development. I'll let Michelle and Kelly jump in with what you specifically had as well.
Yes, I chose letter D, personal growth. I can do this. Something just to achieve.
Same, personal growth, looking for opportunities to really challenge myself in both realms.
Great. And I'll say from my standpoint, I was looking to join the board of PRSA Detroit, and I kept getting the newsletter, and I looked, and a lot of people had APR after the name, mine didn't. And I kind of felt left out, and I was like, I got to do this for that. And so I saw that there would be professional development growth for it. Tammy, anything else to add from your perspective?
Yeah, professional development also, as you said, like I said when I did my introduction, I felt like a journalist doing PR. So I thought this would be a great way for me to learn these tenets, but also to show, because, in Metro Detroit, I know a lot of people as a journalist. And so to have the APR letters behind my name shows that I've also invested my time and energy into learning the tenets of PR too.
Great. So now we're going to get into the overview and into some of the steps, but we're also going to take a break with each one of these, as I mentioned earlier, to really provide some additional insights and discussion and open it up to Q&A. So again, if you have any questions, please, you can start putting those into the Q&A icon there. Just click on that and start typing those in. Those come directly to the panelists. We'll be able to answer those throughout. We'll also reserve some time at the end. All right. I believe Kelly going to walk through the overview process.
Yes, so as you can see from what's on the screen, there are quite a bit of steps in the process, but I think aside from looking at that graphic, one thing I just want to make really clear before I dive in is making sure that you understand when you are ready, because there is a time clock, as you can see. There's a lot to understand, and I think that's why it took me so long to go through the process, is really understanding what is expected in the panel presentation and what's expected as far as the key things that you need to understand or the KPIs. So before you officially apply and get that time clock started, the biggest thing is talk to your peers, talk to people you know who have the APR, understand what they're looking for in the panel presentation and really what you know or what you need to know in order to get that done. And also what kinds of campaigns or the work that you've done will help you do your panel presentation. Because once you officially apply and complete that questionnaire, once you are accepted and told that you can move on to the panel presentation, your clock begins. So there is a 1-year deadline. So you sign up on January 1st, you have to complete both the panel presentation and the exam by December 31st. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of prep that comes with both, depending on how experienced you are as a speaker or generally how comfortable you feel with each component. Because I know some people breeze through the panel and it takes, the exam is much harder. And then the opposite is true sometimes. The panel is the hard part and the exam is much easier. So understand what your challenges are in the process and kind of everything that you have to do to get through each component before you submit that application. From there, once your questionnaire is completed, make sure that you have the opportunity to practice. I would say the biggest thing is practice, practice, practice. We're all communicators. We all speak for a living or, engage with others, and that can seem easy, but it's much different when you're speaking to a panel. So that mock and that practice is very important, and we'll dive deeper into that here later on. Some really key things to note as you get past the panel. Once you were passed on to take the exam, you will be given a link to schedule it through the site that is good for you. I know a lot of people are virtual. We've recently switched proctors within PRSA, so I believe that the majority of the time people do take it virtually. It's very important that you not only schedule the exam, know when you scheduled it, and you show up to the exam, because you if you miss it completely and don't attempt to reschedule it, you will forfeit that fee. And if you don't give them at least 2 business days, you also will forfeit that fee. So just make sure you understand the process to booking that exam and understand kind of the expectations of your environment. And again, we'll go into that a little bit later, but there are a lot of nuances to be aware of to educate yourself on before you dive into that process. And, once you pass the exam, you officially earn your APR. The good thing is, pretty quickly, you'll almost instantaneously, if you passed it, And another thing to really reiterate, because I feel like we don't talk about this enough, is once you earn your APR, you do have to renew it every 3 years. So, and most of us already do the activities that it takes to earn your APR, such as being part of panel presentations, mentoring, attending programs, continuing education, all of those things. So that is part of having your APR and kind of the long end of the process.
I know we're going to be walking through a couple other things and dividing this up in panelists, so go ahead, Michelle.
All right, so you'll hear us talk a lot about KSAs, and that stands for knowledge, skills, and abilities. And that's because the APR process is actually broken into two very different types of KSAs. So the first set are evaluated during the panel presentation, and those are the soft skills. So things listed here like creativity, multitasking, presentation skills, things that you can't test on a computerized exam. So once you pass the panel, you're able to take the exam, just as Kelly had mentioned, but the exam has a completely different set of KSAs. And what's interesting about them is that they're all weighted differently. The APR exam is very heavily focused on what we call RPI, and that's research planning, implementation, and evaluation. And that's 30% of the exam. And that covers everything from research methods to audience identification, data interpretation, all of those things. And taking that research to develop goals, objectives, and strategies, because those are words that people tend to use interchangeably, but they're not the same. Objectives are not the same as goals. Objectives are who does what by when and how much. They're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time specific. Once you do the APR exam, you'll have all that memorized. The SMART goals see, I got mixed up. SMART objectives. They're a lot different from a goal or a strategy. The next KSA is leading the PR function, and that's 20%. And that includes business literacy, organizational structures. It's things like what's the difference between a nonprofit and a not-for-profit, because there's a difference. But again, people often use those words interchangeably. The other KSAs on the exam include ethics and law, which is 15%. There's issues management and crisis communications, which is 15%. There's managing relationships, and that includes media relations and internal communications. That's 15%. And there's also theories, models, and history, which is 5%. And we'll talk more about these as we continue this afternoon. So next slide.
So as far as preparing for the exam and the panel presentation, there's a link at the top here, and that's the PRSA national link to the accreditation process. You'll find a lot of resources there. It has Q&A about the APR process, the steps. I know we're going through this pretty quickly today, but you can go through there and see more about the particular steps. The APR study guide is also at that link. That's the Bible of the APR process. I printed it out. Most people, you print it out. It's almost a couple hundred pages. It has a lot of background in it. It has all the KSAs. Everything is spelled out in the APR study guide. And so what you do is you decide your approach to learning everything in the APR study guide. There's APR online courses, boot camps, or you can do it on your own as a self-guided study. The APR online courses, there's a national course, weekly meetings. You can look at the recordings if you missed the weekly meeting. Mine was at 8 o'clock on Tuesday nights. You'll have people on those meetings from all over the world. You'll have people that are listening in from, 3 o'clock in the morning in Germany who are military and getting their APR. You'll have people in California. You'll have people in South America. It's really great. And people share their experiences and insight as far as APR. Orlando also has an option for those of you that are Orlando PRSA members. It's kind of the same thing. Both of the courses break down the APR study guide into modules and then go through them so you learn what the tenets are that you need to know for the APR, the presentation and the test. The boot camps, those are 2 to 3 days. You fly through those. Michelle did that. I did not have enough background to be able to go through the boot camp and know it well enough to be able to pass the test. So I did the APR National online course, or you can do it on your own. You can pick up, you can print out the study guide. You pay it's $385 to be able to take the test, and you kind of just guide yourself through it. When you pay that amount to apply for this exam and the presentation, you should check too in advance. My employer reimbursed the cost of the application fee and also the books. I got some folders, I printed out a lot of things at work and they were fine with that. You'll find that your employer, because of what you're learning in the process, many are very supportive of this. Next slide, please, Rich. So some of the things when you decide to do this, I found having a mentor. I actually had 2 people that mentored me through the process. One was a retired executive in media relations. Another owns her own PR business. They were great. And I found them through my local APR chapter. You'll have each chapter, Orlando and Detroit, both have APR committees. The folks there will be very helpful to you if you choose to start this process. And then if you find a mentor, the one-on-one is really priceless. They help you through, mine helped me through my questionnaire, read through it, said, hey, you're missing these KSAs, you might want to add this. The panel presentation, one of my mentors allowed me to give her, do the panel presentation for her, and we found that my computer did not have sound on the videos that I had included in my presentation. So that was a godsend that we did that ahead of time. And they also stay on you to finish because, it's easy to say I'm too busy or I don't have time, or all of a sudden it's a month and you haven't, done something with that you needed to do to stay on track with APR. Your mentor will keep you on track. There are there's online practice exams. Quizlet is a great one. It actually takes you through scenarios that you might see on the exam. I've never filled out so many index cards in my life, but writing that stuff out helped me. It wasn't so much flashing myself, but it was writing out. And there are recommended textbooks that are part of the study guide. There's one main one and others are really bonus.
All right. Thank you, Michelle and Tammy, on walking through KSAs and also some of the prep and the resources. So I'm going to open it up for a broader discussion here. We're not going to have all panelists speak in each of them, but and then we'll take a chance to answer some of the questions at this point as well, and we'll continue moving on. So one question here you'll see on the screen is, there's a lot of resources available. How do I know what to focus on? So I'll start with saying, yes, the beauty is there's a lot of resources. The downside is there's a lot of resources and it can be extremely overwhelming. And each person's got a different approach. It all is going to come down to based on how you actually learn. I focused on one book, and just to go back, that was that Cutlip and Center's Effective Public Relations. Like Tammy and others, yes, I printed off the study guide. I used that as my Bible as well. Those were my 2 main ones, but I know people that read multiple books, a lot of different approaches. So everyone's different. It depends on how you learn. But go ahead, Tammy, and share from your standpoint.
That Effective Public Relations was the only book that I bought originally. And the study guide does crosswalk with that book in many instances. I did end up buying an additional book on measurement because I had absolutely no background on measurement. I did refer to it a few times. I have it still. And intend to use it when I am able to put together a campaign where I'm able to set things up in the beginning to be measured, and then the process. So the other books, just time-wise, you really have to manage your time through this too. So, those are the two main things that I used.
Okay, I'm going to go to some of the questions we have that are more specific to this section. Some we'll answer a little later because it's talk about just best advice overall. We'll share that as we go through. But one of the questions is, are there mock test exams out there that are available for practice similar to mock SAT and ACTs? I'll open it up to the panel. Kelly, Michelle. Kelly, go ahead.
None that I've found. However, Quizlet is great. There are questions in there that I'm getting based on the format were pulled from the exam based on just memory and or positioned in a way that are similar to the ones that are on the exam. And then there are a couple, I want to say about a dozen or so, that are part of that study guide and all those materials provided by the UAB. But when I was going through it, nothing like that existed. Unfortunately, you cannot buy a practice exam.
Michelle?
Well, so actually I found two. There's one that's online that is free and anybody can find it. It's on the PRSA website. You can go on there. It's older questions. So some of the questions are actually kind of, they're weirded. They're worded a little odd. They're flashback maybe 15 years, some of the words in there. There's also one that you can purchase on PRSA.org. I think it's $35. So you can take that one that's a little bit newer. So yeah, there are some resources, and like Kelly mentioned, the Quizlets, and Tammy mentioned, the Quizlets are also very helpful.
I did that online, the free one too. And when you go through the national course, there's a checklist, and it takes you through different quizzes, different mock scenarios, and when you go through that, they keep a tally of the percentage of completion that you have in that course. And they say if you get to about 70% complete rate, you know enough that you should be able to pass the exam. They really run you through so much. They guide you through so much studying and quizzing and writing that you should be well prepared. I'm not sure how Orlando handles that, if they have anything like that.
We're starting to have you break up there a little bit, Tammy, at the end there. So I'm going to jump over to one other question, if we may. Again, some of these are focused like on the exam specifically, and others, and we're going to talk about the computer-based exam in just a moment. But I'm just going to go from a higher level question because this is about participation and even getting started, like best advice you have for someone even considering pursuing APR. That's one question. Another one, would you recommend doing the exam right out of college or once you have started in the field? So someone wants to take about the purpose of taking it, best advice for even considering it. Kelly, I'm going to go to you.
Yeah, sure. I would say it helped me understand how to pull together an effective campaign. I think I'm maybe biased because I strongly recommend that everybody get this, but I think the biggest takeaway from the APR process and all is it really makes you understand what it takes to be effective and all the components you have to look at. And I definitely wasn't looking through that lens before I took on the APR process. And also as I went through each step of the way. So I hope that answered the question, Rich. If not, I'm happy to dive in a different direction.
All right, others? Michelle, do you want to jump in on that one?
Sure. So the question is whether you would recommend doing the exam right out of college, correct?
That's one of them, and then just best advice for even someone considering pursuing it.
Okay, well, I'll answer the first part of that with doing it right out of college. My understanding is there's still a 5-year wait. You need to get some experience in the field before you take it. The other question, as far as advice goes, again, this is something that if you take the online study course, you will hear this every week, and we will tell you, don't take the exam until you have studied and you really feel that you know the material, because that 1 year could come up very quickly.
There
Yes.
is a that link that we had with the national PRSA's APR accreditation resources. At that link, they have a certificate in principles of public relations, and that's for college seniors and recent grads. So that might be a good first start, and that would be a great introduction to the APR and PRSA tenants.
Thank you, Tammy. I was just bringing it up so I could remember what the formal name is. Yes, Certificate in Principles of Public Relations. So that is good for earlier in your career, for those that are more mid-level, higher level. Definitely the APR is specific for that. It used to be a 5-year requirement, but years are not necessarily what it's about. But think of what Kelly mentioned earlier. Do you have an actual example that you could use in your panel presentation that you're going to present of where you actually had research, planning, implementation, evaluation? And sometimes that takes time to get that. Doesn't mean you can't earlier in your career, and hopefully you do. But some things to keep in mind. All right, I'm going to move along to the next part. If you remember, Kelly outlined the whole process here. The next part is the questionnaire that Michelle's going to walk through.
Sure. So before you're scheduled for the panel presentation, you must submit the questionnaire. And it's due 2 weeks before the panel, and there are actually 2 parts to it. So the first part asks things such as what you do in your current position, how your company or agency is structured, what changes might be needed there. It asks what you would do if you were starting a PR department or agency today. The second part goes into your experience related to your panel presentation. So there's one question that specifically asks about the outcomes of your program or campaign, and that's an important part of the communications planning process, the whole RPI process. And you'll hear us continue to talk about that. It's 30%, again, 30% of the exam. In my experience, just as far as the questionnaire goes, I thought it was a really good time to reflect on things. There was a question, I remember in the first section, the question was about time management. But as I started thinking about it, it brought me back to a crisis situation that I was involved in a few jobs ago. And as I was writing it, I remember reliving the first 48 hours of that event, and it had been covered in national media. So I found links online and I included them in the questionnaire as I wrote about it. So in some ways, the questionnaire for me was almost like a career journal. And it gave me a chance to kind of look back and reflect on some of the things I've done over the years.
I'm going to open it up here. Actually, Michelle, if you want to continue, if you don't mind there, and that the 3 things specifically, those are specifically in that questionnaire, correct?
Correct. Yes, I took we took some of these from the questionnaire. Just so you know, you can go online on the PRSA.org website and download the questionnaire today. And one thing too, even if this is something you're thinking about not even beginning or pursuing 5 years from now, you can download that questionnaire now and start responding to it, start thinking about it. And like I said, it's a really nice reflection piece. So a couple of the questions, as you'll see here, why have you chosen to become accredited at this time? So again, it's one of those things where it's more thoughtful and more reflective. How can you improve your productivity? Good question for all of us to think about at times. And, describe how you planned or participated in planning a specific public relations program for an organization or client. And that's really what becomes your panel presentation. So when you're doing your panel presentation, it's about what you did to do that program or campaign.
Filling out the questionnaire really helped me organize what I was going to do for the panel presentation. So as you see here, it goes through your background, and it also, though, wants you to share a specific public relations campaign. That's what the panel presentation is. And so, like, for instance, I did a panel presentation on a teenage boy who had had a double lung transplant due to vaping. So I walked through, I had done that 5 years prior, but I went back and collected, there were still press releases on the hospital system website. I combined all of that and walked through what we did and aligned it with what I had learned in studying for the APR. and explained all this in the questionnaire. So then when you get to the panel presentation, the panelists have already read your questionnaire. So they know basically what public relations campaign you're presenting. And then you're able to walk through some of the more detail, the more specific details, and answer their questions about how you executed. So
And Tammy, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say, you made up a really good point too that just I want to mention. So even if you're not planning to work on your APR anytime soon, but you have something, save those things, because you were talking about going on the website to look for those press releases and they're no longer there. Download them now, because it's hard to find some of that stuff sometimes.
Kelly, go ahead.
I was just about to say, because I worked on mine real time, I had all of those things, but I have worked with many people who are like begging their previous employer to get access to assets. So definitely anything that you can get your hands on now, even if you do this in 5 to 10 years, at least you have it and you can keep it fresh.
Well, I don't see any specific questions to the questionnaire, but I'm going to keep this one that's in the same space about what's one of the coolest things you learned about yourself or the field through the process. Because now at this point, you've, of course, applied, you've considered you're going to do it, you've started to fill out the questionnaire. Anything in filling out that questionnaire, any of you of what you learned, whether it was the questionnaire itself or just the whole process, of one of the coolest things you learned about yourself or the field?
I can go first. I think the biggest thing for me is, research is clearly a big part of everything we do, but I don't think I really ever paid attention to the data. And so I think the coolest thing I learned is how to be able to look at things that we have access to on a daily basis, right? Engagement of employees through an intranet or internet system, engagement through surveys, or watching things kind of happen in front of us that we never realize were metrics that you can document to help tell your story, or help, even better, go to your leadership to get them to understand why we should or shouldn't do something. That was a big game changer for me, and it really changed the way that I pull together campaigns. And the number one thing that I always ask now is, what problem are we trying to solve? And that always segues me to bringing in the data to help tell the story to leadership. So that was huge for me.
Great. I'm going to keep moving here because we have a few other things to discuss as well. This is a little bit more on the panel presentation here as well. Sorry, bear with me one second. There we go. There we go.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, so panel presentation, we'll dive a little deeper as I promised. So in regard to time, you have a minimum of 60 minutes and up to 2 hours. And I know at first that time seems daunting. I promise you it flies when you are in the middle of a presentation and trying to really communicate the nuances of that. So basic format of the panel is you're going to have three APRs, and there will typically be a lead. So there is a chair that is kind of selected, and that person will help lead through the questions and navigating the process. And you can let them know your preferences as to whether or not you want them to ask questions during your presentation, or if you want them to save them till the end, whatever works best for you. I did mine online. Most of us, I think, over the past 3 to 4 years did theirs online, and every chapter is different. But if you prefer in person, there should be an opportunity to do that. But again, every chapter is different. So I would turn to your APR chairs based on your preferences. I will tell you the huge benefit to being online is the opportunity to leverage technology. The disadvantage is technology doesn't always work for you. So a big part of the panel presentation, we shared mocks. And if you don't have formal mock process through your chapter, the ability to practice with fellow APRs is huge. And I think I probably 8 or 9 practice sessions, which is excessive. So you don't have to be like me. But every time I did it, it really forced me to understand like what I was doing right, how people were understanding what I was communicating. And I recorded at least one of those because there's a lot of value in watching yourself present, really to understand your disfluencies and maybe what visually the end user is seeing. A big recommendation I got when doing my panel presentation, and you don't have to do it this way, but a lot of APRs I know of have, is they structured their presentation based on RPI. because RPI is a really big element of what the panelists are looking for that you understand. So it's just a great kind of organic way to communicate the information in your campaign and really spell it out, and also keeps you kind of organized mentally. Make sure that you test all of the materials when you're doing your mocks and your practices. And one thing that I think is really big outside of RPI, and as you explain things about yourself and your experiences, don't be afraid to use the phrase knowing what you know now, especially if it's been 5-10 years since you've done your campaign, because a lot has changed and you've really analyzed this campaign. So it's okay to say we didn't do this, but thinking about it more, this is what I would have done, because it demonstrates your knowledge of RPI and the APR process overall. So much like the exam, now that it's online, you know pretty quickly if you've advanced or not. I think I knew within the day. Some chapters may not be as quick, but you should know fairly quickly via email, and then you will get a formal letter as well, letting you know that you've advanced and kind of what to do next.
All right, going to open it up for any other comments. And as you can see there, about doing at least one mock panel or practice session is very important. I'm going to go to a question here. It's going to tie into, we're going to talk about the exam here in just a moment, the computer-based exam. There's a question here, is it $385 total or $770 total for the exam and panel?
The total, $385 total. That's your whole cost. Now, if you don't complete it within the year, there is an additional fee that you pay. I want to say it's $50, but do not quote me on that, because that's based on when I took it, so it may have changed since then.
It was $50 when I was the deadline.
Okay. And then question is it possible to listen in on another person's panel presentation? I've been a panelist for many years. We have never had that. It's designed to be confidential with that individual who is the candidate and the 3 APRs. In fact, all the materials, notes that we take are supposed to be turned in and destroyed, so that information does not go beyond that. So what's best is during these mock panels, and I say mock, it could be within practice groups, different things that you have. That's always an opportunity to be able to do that, or to rely on other APRs. I'm going to jump over to a broader question here. We're going to get into the exam here in just a moment, but as far as panel presentation, Michelle, Tammy, Kelly, anything? Kelly, of course, already went through some of that, but Michelle or Tammy, any other insights on the panel presentation?
Yeah, one thing too, when you think of the panel presentation, it's not that you are just talking at somebody and presenting slides. It's actually a discussion. So you might go through a few slides, and then they stop you and they say, can you tell me more about that? And you talk more through it. So it's almost a back and forth. It's not such a very formal, rigid type of process, which I think is actually a benefit.
Okay, I know there's a few questions here that we're getting regarding about whether pay raises, what the employers are, if they're prioritizing that. We'll get to that to the end, because I want to make sure we address the next step in this, which is the exam, which is the last part of the process. So we've got the application, the questionnaire, then we have the panel presentation, the actual exam, if you advance, then the exam, and I'll have the next person walk through this. And
Okay.
I believe that is Michelle.
Yes. After you pass the panel, you can schedule the exam. And it's important to mention, I think we mentioned this already, if you've taken the exam in the past, it's now administered by a new company, so it's a different testing platform. So that went into effect this month, so it might look a little different. The exam also is entirely remote. I know Tammy did hers when she went to a testing center. That's not an option right now. It's not an option anymore, I should say. But it has some new benefits, one of which I think is important. There's on-demand scheduling. So you don't have to wait days anymore to take the exam. You can do it within 24 hours of passing your panel presentation or getting the code from the panel presentation. You have 3 hours and 45 minutes to finish the exam, and it's all multiple choice. And somebody put this in the Q&A. This is important too to mention. There are 132 scored questions but there are another 30 or so that are what they call beta questions. So there's really over 160 questions, and you don't know which ones count. So for example, when I was doing mine, there was one question that was in there 3 times, and it was worded slightly different, or the answers were slightly different, but I figured that was probably a beta question, and they're putting those in there to test them. When you're doing it online, you can cross out answers, you can flag questions, so you can go back later in case you're worried about the time. Like, you can go back and see those questions that you flagged. You know, as we talked about previously, the exam looks at the KSAs that are outlined in the APR study guide. And again, the APR study guide, you can download that online right now, and it'll outline what those KSAs are. But one thing that we mentioned in the bubble here is that there's some overlap sometimes between the questions. So for example, there might be a question that relates both to ethics and to crisis. And the thing is, with the APR process, you have to think through the process that you would follow in an ethical situation and a crisis situation, because there's specific processes for that. So the APR teaches you that you're not just doing what you think is right, it's what is across the industry. One great thing too is when you hit submit, and you find out immediately if you passed or failed, and it also gives you a breakdown of how you scored in each area. So on the next slide, you'll see how I scored in each area. So in theories, models, and history, for example, I scored the highest. I got 100%, which is probably because I had a double minor in history and English, so the history aspect was really interesting to me. But the area where I had virtually no experience, financial communications, which falls under leading the PR functions, I scored the lowest at 80%. So it's useful when working on your APR to do an assessment of your experience through the lens of the KSAs.
Now, not everyone is as great as Michelle with her numbers. And in my day, we didn't have that. We had computer-based Prometric Center at the time, but we had a printout that basically said for history, you got 50%. There were 2 questions. I got 1 right, 1 wrong. And I didn't know pass or fail at the time. I had to try to do math on my own. And when I was in 60% on some of them and 80, 90 on others, I had to try to do math and figure out if I passed or not. And I didn't know until I got the actual letter. So, but I bring this up because everyone's different. And it's not about, you know, certainly we want to get the highest percent, but it's not always the case. And not everyone always passes on the first time. So there's questions that you see in the chat as well as how many times can you take the test? Is there a waiting period before you retake? So I'll open that up to anyone else that would like to answer that.
So
Kelly or Tammy? Oh, go ahead, Tammy.
One thing about the exam is the questions themselves are more story based or scenario based. And that was one thing that I really felt was helpful in doing the national study group, was that they teach you how to write those types of questions using the APR tenets. So you're not surprised when you sit down in the exam and they're talking about this PR campaign from the local garbage supplier wanted to establish this, this, and this. What do you think were their first, you know, their best 3 steps? You're already trained to think that way when you go through the study course. So they're all multiple choice questions. One of the things that really helped me was I did a brain dump as soon as I sat down at the exam. As soon as the clock started ticking, you get a little piece of paper. I had memorized, I had done is it acronyms where you have a word and then you put down, you make a funny saying and then you write down the different tenets or different, you know, facts that you need to remember, the processes. So I filled up that paper. It took about 10 minutes and just filled up that paper. And I used that as a reference back as I was taking the exam. And, you know, here's this process. Which step do you do first? I had already written it out on my cheat sheet after my brain dump. And so you could do that too. Now, I guess, like they were saying before, it's all remote. You could still do that. That would be a good first step for many people.
Okay, thank you for that. I know there's I was going to say, there's a question in chat, which we answered there. Is a question about how much is required to pass. It is 63% computer-based exam. But go ahead, Kelly. I may be
say-
answering the earlier question.
Something to note about how many times you can fail.
Thank you.
I did fail. Just full disclosure, I failed the first time. And a big part of that was I didn't understand really well how I learned. And I know that seems kind of like, how did you not know that? I didn't understand the best way for me to digest information in regard to this. And so it was very important for me to, after I took the exam, that's how I did better the second time. So you could fail. It's a very big possibility, but it will make you much better the second time around to better understand the exam. So don't freak out too much about that. It could happen, but it's okay if it does.
Thank you for that.
Or you
And
pass, or you get you passed and you go out to the car and you bust into tears because you're so relieved.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I did. It was just, you put a lot of effort into it. You really have to make a decision that you're going to put the effort and time into it. There were a couple weekends that I just locked myself away in the office during the study course, and I spent a whole weekend just going through and going checking the boxes, and so you learn so much though. So we're talking.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we're going to wrap up here. We're nearing time. We wanted to share with you what you can gain. This might answer some of the questions we're seeing as far as benefits here, as far as how's that help for your career. If you can answer, we're going to answer individually along the way what our key takeaway is, and then we'll wrap up here because we want to be respectful of your time, stay on schedule. But Tammy, want to walk through?
Sure. So thinking strategically. So, this isn't just when you're doing a PR campaign, you're not just thinking hits or just getting a story. The APR helps you think strategically from building the campaign, looking for what you need to do, all the way through execution and evaluation on the other end. So the RPI really forces impact, not just activity. So it helped me think of processes differently. The CEUs, I'm still working on 15 CEUs every 3 years and what that entails. Things like helping with the national study cohort. You can be a host there, like Michelle does quite often. I've done that a couple times. Participating in things like this, sharing your expertise. And really one of the big benefits is having that APR after your name. People know that you know these tenants and these markers, and just the professionalism that it brings is really significant.
And then we're going to get to key takeaways, and we each can answer as far as some of the additional questions coming in as soon as we get through those. So, Tammy, I think you're the first one as far as key takeaway. Your go-to message there.
My key takeaway, decide if you have time for this. Like I said, I spent a whole couple weekends just focusing on this. And we're really summer oriented. We live on a lake in Michigan. I don't do any major projects if I can avoid it between June and August. So I really like the winter cohort and being able to do that. That starts next week, actually. So if you decide that you want to jump in, you could sign up and start on, I believe it's the 30th or 31st.
All right, thank you, Tammy.
Mine is the second one. I kind of already shared it, is really understand how you learn best. And I mean that in regard to the APR, because, a lot of my friends really were in the cramming style, and I realized that does not work for me. But bigger picture and how I learn things and how I structure campaigns, that really helps me to understand how I digest information to be able to pull things together and tell a bigger story. So I think that the biggest takeaway I got is understanding you and how you digest information.
Thank you.
And mine is know that you can do this. There are so many resources out there. There's books, there are online classes, there are people. So you can do this. The resources are there.
And I play off that as well. You're not alone. There's mentors, support network, resources. that are available. I make myself available. Others have made themselves available. In fact, that's one of our key things here. Let us be your resources as well. Each of us have agreed. If you want to reach out individually to us, take advantage of that. Certainly, you have your local chapters and other online resources. I do want to answer the question, though, as part of this as well. Each of us, you ask 10 people, 10 APRs, you're probably going to get 10 different answers as far as where employers view or prioritize it and whether or not there's actually pay raises for that. Some do, some don't. Some don't even understand what APRs, depends upon what your organization is. If you're in a public relations firm or corporate communications where PR is prevalent there and there are other APRs, it's understood. But that is something that is part of educating people. Also from a standpoint of, can it help in your career as far as getting hired and elevated by title and money? Personally, I look for APRs when I'm doing interviews with candidates. It tells me that they have gone through that process and have been validated. That doesn't mean not having your APR, you're not successful, you're not great at what you do, but it is that certification that really shows you've gone that extra step to do it and go through that process. And then I'm going to jump to the end here to say thank you to everyone that has joined for attending the webinar. I certainly appreciate it, and I share this on behalf of PRSA Detroit, PRSA Orlando. We appreciate your active participation in the Q&A. As a reminder, the webinar is recorded. Will be shared with all attendees afterwards. We wish you success on your journey to earning your APR. There are questions about how long is it going to take. It's different. But please, even if you're considering it in any way, even just going through the process is going to be beneficial to you, even if you don't go to that next step. But we encourage you to go to that next step. If you have any questions, again, reach out to any of us. With that, we're going to conclude it. We certainly appreciate, again, you deciding to consider it and get on your journey to earning your APR. I want to thank each of the panelists. Again, thank you to PRSA Detroit and PRSA Orlando. Thank you.